Have you ever looked into the eyes of the one you swore your soul to, only to see a stranger handing you a death sentence? They stripped her title. He shattered their bond. But when they threw her to the wolves, they forgot she was destined to rule them. The great hall of Oakhaven Fortress was paralyzingly silent. For centuries, these ancient stone walls had witnessed feasts, declarations of war, and the forging of sacred alliances. But tonight, they were a tomb. Rosalind of House Whitmore knelt on the freezing cobblestone, the rough surface biting into her bare knees. Her silver-white gown, the very dress she had worn only 3 moons ago to be crowned Luna of the Iron Fang Pack, was now soaked in mud and a sickening splash of crimson blood. The metallic stench of copper and the damp scent of the relentless autumn rain clung to her skin. She looked up through the tangled mess of her dark hair, her vision blurred with tears and disbelief. Standing on the dais above her was Cedric, Lord Cedric of House Ashdown, Alpha of Iron Fang, and until a few moments ago, her fated mate. "Cedric, please," Rosalind whispered, a voice a fragile, broken thing echoing in the cavernous hall. "You cannot believe these lies. My wolf weeps for yours. Look into our bond. You know my heart." Cedric's face was a mask of carved granite. The warmth, the fierce, protective fire that used to ignite in his emerald eyes whenever he looked at her, was completely extinguished. In its place was a chilling, calculated emptiness. "The bond speaks only of deception, Rosalind." Cedric's voice boomed, carrying the heavy, authoritative resonance of the Alpha command. It pressed against her chest, forcing her lungs to constrict. "You are found standing over the body of Lord Reginald, our most revered elder, with your hunting dagger buried to the hilt in his chest. You were caught with letters bearing the seal of the rogue clans of the Dreadwood. The evidence is absolute. They were planted." She screamed, the desperation finally breaking her composure. "Arabella handed me the letters. She told me they were tax disputes from the borderlands. And the dagger, my dagger, was stolen from my chambers 2 nights ago." At the mention of her name, a figure stepped out from the shadows behind Cedric's heavy oak chair. Arabella. She was Cedric's beta, his childhood companion, and a woman who had never hidden her disdain for Rosalind. Arabella's golden hair fell in perfect waves over her dark leather armor. A slow, triumphant smirk played on her lips, visible only to Rosalind, before she masked it with an expression of deep, performative sorrow. "To blame another for your treason, Lady Rosalind," Arabella said, her voice dripping with venom masquerading as pity. "It breaks my heart to see how far the Whitmore line has fallen. Lord Reginald discovered your plot to usurp the Alpha's absolute power, and you silenced him. It is a tragedy, a vile, unspeakable tragedy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathered pack. These were people Rosalind had healed. She had delivered their pups, tended to their wounds after border skirmishes, and fought tooth and nail to ensure they did not starve during the long winters. Now they looked at her with bared teeth and eyes full of murder. She looked back to Cedric, begging him silently to see through the illusion. But as she reached out through the ethereal, spiritual tether that connected their souls, she hit a wall of absolute ice. He was shutting her out. Worse, he was complicit. In that agonizing fraction of a second, as Cedric briefly glanced at Arabella with a look of shared understanding, the devastating truth hit Rosalind like a physical blow. Cedric wasn't blinded by Arabella's lies. He was part of them. Lord Reginald had been the last elder to support the Whitmore family's ancestral claim to the fertile Eastern valleys. Cedric desperately wanted to exploit for iron mining, which Rosalind had strictly forbidden. "By the laws of our ancestors," Cedric began, his voice echoing with finality, "treason is met with death. But because the goddess bound our souls, I will grant you mercy. I strip you of the title of Luna. I strip you of the name Iron Fang." "No," Rosalind gasped, clutching her chest as a searing heat began to build over her heart. "I, Cedric of House Ashdown, Alpha of Oakhaven," he roared, his eyes flashing wolf gold, "reject you, Rosalind of House Whitmore, as my mate and my equal. I sever this bond, now and forever." The snap was entirely physical. It felt as though a rusted blade had been shoved between her ribs, twisting violently to rip her heart from its very cavity. Rosalind screamed a harrowing, blood-curdling sound of pure agony that forced several Pat members to cover their ears. She collapsed onto the stone floor, her body convulsing as the glowing silver mark on her collarbone, the mark of their union, burned fiercely before turning a dead, bruised purple and fading into an ugly scar. Her inner wolf wailed in catastrophic grief, curling into a tight ball in the recesses of her mind, dying from the severed connection. "Take her to the northern gates," Cedric commanded, turning his back on her trembling form. "Throw her into the Dreadwood. If the winter does not take her, the rogues will. She is exiled. Anyone who offers her shelter, food, or mercy will share her fate." Strong hands grabbed her under the arms, dragging her limp, agonizingly heavy body across the rough stones. The heavy oak doors of the great hall slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate and locking away the life, the love, and the man she thought she knew. The Dreadwood was not merely a forest. It was a graveyard of ancient pines and jagged ice-covered ravines where sunlight went to die. For 3 weeks, Rosalind survived in a state of living death. The winter had come early, blanketing the unforgiving terrain in 3 feet of snow. Without the warmth of the pack bond, her internal temperature regulation was failing. Her human form was too weak to hunt, and her wolf form was too broken to surface. She subsisted on frozen berries, gnawing on pine bark to stave off the agonizing cramps in her stomach, and sleeping in hollowed-out tree roots to hide from the piercing blizzards. Every night, she dreamt of the warmth of the great hall. Every morning she woke to the brutal reality of her exile, coughing up blood as the frostbite began to claim the tips of her fingers and toes. The physical pain, however, was a welcome distraction from the agonizing void in her soul. A rejected mate rarely survived a month. The mind unravels, the spirit rots, and the wolf eventually forces the body to shut down in an act of mercy. But Rosalind possessed the stubborn, unyielding blood of the Whitmores. She refused to die simply because a coward had thrown her away. It happened on the 21st night. The temperature had plummeted drastically, and Rosalind was staggering blindly through a whiteout snowstorm, her legs numb, her vision tunneling. She didn't hear the crunch of snow behind her until it was too late. A massive, mangy wolf lunged from the white oblivion, its jaw snapping inches from her throat. Rosalind threw herself sideways, tumbling down a steep, snowy embankment. She crashed into the trunk of a dead oak tree, the wind knocked out of her. 3 more wolves appeared at the crest of the hill. They were rogues feral, packless, their eyes yellow and feverish with starvation. They didn't want to play, they wanted meat. Rosalind tried to summon her wolf to shift and fight, but only a pathetic whimper echoed in her mind as the largest rogue leaped through the air, jaws wide to tear out her throat. Rosalind closed her eyes. So this is the end, she thought. But the fatal bite never came. A deafening roar shattered the howling wind. The sound was so powerful, so laced with pure ancient dominance, that the very ground beneath Rosalind's trembling body vibrated. She opened her eyes just in time to see a massive shadow intercept the rogue midair. It was a wolf of monstrous proportions, easily twice the size of a standard alpha. His fur was a midnight black that seemed to absorb the faint moonlight, and his eyes burned like liquid hellfire. With a single brutal snap of his jaws, the giant black wolf crushed the rogue's spine. He dropped the lifeless body and turned his terrifying gaze on the remaining 2 scavengers. He didn't even need to growl. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his aura sent the rogues fleeing, yelping into the storm. The black wolf turned his massive head toward Rosalind. He stepped closer, the snow melting instantly beneath his massive paws due to the intense heat radiating from his body. Rosalind was paralyzed. She knew exactly what this creature was. The legends were true. This was King Alistair of the Crimson Peak, the Alpha King, a tyrant warlord who ruled the northern continent with an iron fist, whispered to be as cruel as he was cunning. He shifted seamlessly, standing before her in his human form. He was unnervingly tall, draped in a heavy cloak of black fur over dark, intricate armor. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic cruelty, framed by dark hair dusted with snow. He looked down at her battered, freezing form with an unreadable expression. Rosalind of House Whitmore, Alistair's voice was a low, gravelly baritone that commanded absolute obedience. "You look terrible." Before she could speak, before she could even process how he knew her name, the darkness rushed in to claim her. When Rosalind awoke, she was no longer freezing. She was lying on a mattress stuffed with the softest down, wrapped in heavy, luxurious furs that smelled of cedar, smoke, and an intoxicating, spicy musk. She blinked against the dim light, realizing she was in a sprawling stone bedchamber warmed by a massive hearth. She tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed in protest. Her frostbitten fingers were wrapped in clean linen bandages smeared with a pungent, healing salve. "Drink," a commanding voice ordered. King Alistair was sitting in a high-backed leather chair by the fire, nursing a goblet of dark wine. He stood, walking over to the bed, and handed her a steaming cup of broth. Rosalind hesitated, looking into his sharp obsidian eyes. "If I wanted you dead, little wolf, I would have let the rogues finish their meal in the forest," he said dryly. She took the cup with trembling hands and drank. The warmth flooded her system, bringing tears to her eyes. "Why am I here?" she rasped, her voice rough from disuse. "Where am I?" "You are in High Reach, the capital of Crimson Peak," Alistair replied, leaning against one of the bedposts. "As for why you are here, let us just say the enemy of my enemy is a highly valuable asset." Rosalind frowned in confusion. "Enemy?" Alistair's expression darkened, an intimidating shadow falling over his features. "Your former mate, the treacherous Lord Cedric, has grown arrogant. For 6 months, he has been secretly hoarding iron and brokering clandestine alliances with the southern mercenaries. He plans to challenge the crown. He plans to declare Oakhaven an independent sovereign state and cut off my supply lines." The pieces fell into place in Rosalind's mind with sickening clarity. Cedric needed her family's land, the iron-rich eastern valleys, to fund his rebellion against the Alpha King. And Lord Reginald had discovered it, so Arabella killed him. Rosalind was framed to tie up all the loose ends. "You knew," Rosalind whispered, the realization fueling a sudden burning rage in her chest. "You knew I was innocent." "Of course I knew," Alistair said coldly. "I have spies in every shadow of Oakhaven. I know Cedric used you. I know he shattered your bond and threw you to the ice to die so he could steal your birthright." Rosalind felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she angrily wiped it away. The time for crying over Cedric was dead, frozen somewhere in the Dreadwood. Alistair leaned in closer, his terrifying aura enveloping her, making her heart pound in a completely new, dangerous rhythm. "I am going to march on Oakhaven," the king stated, his voice a lethal promise. "I am going to rip Cedric's throat out and burn his fortress to the ground. But Oakhaven is heavily fortified, and their hidden defensive tunnels are a closely guarded secret. A secret only the Alpha and his Luna would know." He reached out, his large, calloused hand gently tilting her chin up so she was forced to look directly into his terrifying, mesmerizing eyes. "I did not just rescue a broken, exiled girl from the snow, Rosalind. I rescued the rightful heir to the Iron Valleys. I want you to give me the blueprints of Oakhaven's defenses. I want you to stand by my side when I tear your traitorous mate from his throne." Rosalind stared at the king. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was offering a pact with the devil. "And what do I get in return?" she asked, surprised by the sudden steadiness in her own voice. A vicious, devastating smirk spread across King Alistair's face. "I am the Alpha King. I don't just grant favors. I grant absolute power. He leaned in until his lips were a breath away from her ear. Give me Cedric's head on a spike, Rosalind, and I will make you my queen. The silence in the bedchamber grew thick, heavy with the weight of King Alistair's proposal. Queen of the Crimson Peak, to rule beside the most feared alpha on the continent. Rosalind's heart hammered against her ribs, but she did not break his gaze. She was no longer the naive girl who had trusted blindly. The ice of the Dreadwood had frozen her heart, and Alistair's fire was forging it into steel. You offer me a crown, Your Grace, Rosalind said, her voice steady, despite the lingering weakness in her limbs. But a crown given is a collar in disguise. If I am to be your queen, I will not be your pawn. I will not be a pretty ornament traded for strategic advantage. Alistair's lips curled into a slow, terrifying smile that sent a shiver down her spine. The raw, primal danger in his eyes flared, not with anger, but with profound approval. I have no use for pawns, Rosalind, he murmured, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. I have a legion of soldiers for that. I need a partner whose fangs are as sharp as my own. You survived the snapping jaws of the Dreadwood without a wolf to protect you. That is the resilience I demand of the woman who will sit beside me. Then we have a pact, Rosalind declared, but I do not just want Cedric dead. I want him ruined. I want him to watch everything he stole burn to ashes before he takes his final breath. So be it, Alistair agreed, extending his massive, scarred hand. Rosalind placed her bandaged hand in his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of pure white-hot electricity surged up her arm. She gasped, yanking her hand back. Alistair froze, his nostrils flaring as his obsidian eyes locked onto hers with sudden, ravenous intensity. The intoxicating scent of cedar, wood smoke, and spicy musk rolled off him in waves, no longer just a comforting aroma, but a physical pull, sinking deep into her soul. Deep within the fractured, silent chambers of her mind, her inner wolf, the spirit Cedric had nearly killed, twitched. It let out a soft, inquisitive whimper. Second chance, her wolf whispered, the spiritual voice raspy but undeniable. True mate, Alistair stepped back, his chest heaving slightly, realizing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The Alpha King, a man who had reigned solo for centuries, had just found his true mate in a broken, exiled Luna. But neither spoke of it. The ghost of Oakhaven still stood between them, and vengeance had to be served before love could take root. Over the next moon cycle, Rosalind transformed. Under the care of the Crimson Peak healers and the constant proximity-based healing of her true mate's aura, her strength returned tenfold. Her wolf awoke completely larger and more aggressive than before, its silver coat now shimmering with a harsh metallic edge. She spent her days in the war room with King Alistair and his formidable general, Lord Gideon. Rosalind laid bare Oakhaven's secrets. She mapped the hidden catacombs beneath the Whispering Falls, the structural weaknesses in the Eastern Armory, and the blind spots in the watchtower rotations. The tipping point arrived on a freezing morning when a scout dragged a battered spy into the war room. It was a man Rosalind recognized, a lower-ranking guard from Oakhaven named Arthur. He was not a traitor, he was a desperate messenger. Lady Rosalind, Arthur wept, falling to his knees when he saw her standing beside the Alpha King in dark crimson armor. Praise the goddess you live, you must hurry. Cedric has gone mad with paranoia. He has imprisoned your loyal knight, Sir Kylan, and the elders who questioned him. Tomorrow night, under the blood moon, he plans to execute them in the courtyard to cement his absolute authority. A cold fury gripped Rosalind's throat. Sir Kylan had been her sworn protector since she was a child. Arabella and Cedric were systematically slaughtering everyone who held loyalty to the Whitmore name. Alistair placed a heavy, reassuring hand on her shoulder, his touch grounding her rising panic. He looked at Lord Gideon. Summon the vanguard. We do not wait for the spring thaw. We march tonight. The Alpha King turned to Rosalind. his eyes burning with lethal promise. "Suit up, my queen. It is time to reclaim your home." The assault on Oakhaven was a masterclass in brutal efficiency. Under the cover of a raging blizzard, the Crimson Peak army moved like phantoms through the frozen pines. They did not attack the heavily fortified main gates. Instead, Rosalind led King Alistair and a strike team of elite warriors through the freezing, waist-deep waters of the Whispering Falls tunnels. The damp, narrow catacombs smelled of moss and ancient stone. Rosalind navigated the labyrinth flawlessly, her senses heightened by the raging adrenaline and the steady, imposing presence of Alistair right behind her. They bypassed the external defenses entirely, emerging silently from the royal crypts directly beneath the inner keep. Above them, the sounds of celebration echoed. Cedric and Arabella were hosting a lavish banquet in the Great Hall, feasting while the loyalists of Oakhaven starved or awaited execution in the dungeons. "Gideon," Alistair ordered in a low whisper, "take a detachment to the dungeons. Free Sir Kalen and the elders. Slaughter any guard who stands in your way." Gideon nodded, melting into the shadows. Alistair drew his broadsword, the dark steel glinting in the torchlight. He looked at Rosalind, tracing the scar on her collarbone where Cedric's bond mark used to be. "Are you ready to carve out the rot?" "Cut them down," Rosalind said, her eyes flashing silver. They kicked open the heavy oak doors of the great hall. The heavy thud echoed like a cannon blast, immediately silencing the drunken laughter and the lute music. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway, framed by the howling winter storm outside, was Rosalind. She was no longer the muddy, weeping girl begging for mercy. She wore the dark, reinforced leather and crimson fur of the Alpha King's court, a long, curved blade resting easily in her grip. Beside her stood King Alistair, an avatar of pure, unadulterated terror, his monstrous alpha aura bleeding into the room, forcing several weaker wolves to drop to their knees in immediate submission. "Rosalind," Cedric breathed, the silver goblet slipping from his hand and clattering onto the stone floor, his face drained of all color. Beside him, Arabella leaped from her chair, her golden eyes wide with shock and sudden, gripping fear. "You're dead," Arabella shrieked. "The rogue's the winter. I survived the winter," Arabella, Rosalind said, her voice carrying through the hall with chilling clarity. She stepped forward, her boots clicking against the very stones where she had been stripped of her life. "And I brought the storm back with me. Treason." Cedric roared, panic heavily lacing his command. "Guards, kill her." "Kill them both." The Oakhaven guards drew their weapons, but before they could take a single step toward Rosalind, Alistair unleashed his dominance. The sheer, suffocating pressure of the Alpha King's aura slammed into the room like a physical shockwave. The guards collapsed, gasping for air, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. Alistair stepped forward, moving with the terrifying grace of an apex predator. "Anyone who raises a blade to my queen will have their head removed from their shoulders," Alistair snarled, his voice vibrating the very foundations of the hall. Arabella, realizing the guards were useless, let out a feral scream. Her bones cracked and shifted as she tore out of her human skin, transforming into a large golden wolf. She lunged straight for Rosalind, aiming to finish what she had started in the woods. But Rosalind did not draw her sword. She surrendered to the savage roar of her inner spirit. In a flash of blinding silver light, she shifted. A wolf was massive, easily dwarfing Arabella's, its silver coat gleaming like polished armor. The two wolves collided in midair with a sickening crunch. Rosalind's fury, bottled up for months, exploded. Arabella was fast, but Rosalind was fueled by righteous vengeance and the unyielding power of her new, true mate bond. Rosalind clamped her jaws around Arabella's front leg, twisting violently. A sharp crack echoed through the hall, followed by a piteous yelp. Rosalind pinned the golden wolf to the ground, her jaws hovering inches from Arabella's throat. She dug her claws deep into Arabella's chest, forcing the traitor to look up into her glowing, merciless silver eyes. She didn't kill her. Death was too quick. Instead, Rosalind let out a dominating, soul-shattering roar that asserted her absolute supremacy, mentally breaking Arabella's wolf and forcing her into eternal, shameful submission. Meanwhile, Cedric had backed himself against his throne, drawing his sword with trembling hands. Alistair approached him slowly, his sword resting lazily on his shoulder. "You dare challenge the crown, Cedric of House Ashdown?" Alistair mocked, his eyes burning with dark amusement. "You hoard my iron, you plot with mercenaries, and you throw away the greatest treasure this land has ever produced because of your own pathetic greed. I am the Alpha of Oakhaven," Cedric yelled, taking a desperate sweeping swing at the king. Alistair didn't even shift. He simply parried the blow with insulting ease, twisting his wrist to disarm Cedric. The king brought the pommel of his sword crashing into Cedric's jaw, sending the traitorous Alpha sprawling across the dais. Alistair planted his heavy boot on Cedric's chest, pinning him to the stone. "You're nothing but a thief and a coward." Rosalind shifted back to her human form, pulling a heavy crimson cloak over her shoulders. She walked up the steps of the dais, looking down at the man she had once loved. He was bruised, bleeding, and trembling beneath the boot of her true mate. "Rosalind, please," Cedric begged, coughing up blood, his eyes frantically searching hers for the mercy she used to possess. "I was manipulated. Arabella poisoned my mind. I am your mate. You cannot do this." But you severed that bond, Cedric," Rosalind said coldly, feeling absolutely nothing for him but disgust. "You stripped me of my title. You stripped me of my pack. Now I return the favor." She looked at King Alistair and nodded. Alistair drove his sword down, not through Cedric's heart, but through his shoulder, pinning him to the floor. As Cedric screamed, Alistair reached out and placed his hand over Cedric's chest, directly over his spiritual core. With a brutal, dark chant of ancient alpha magic, Alistair forcefully severed Cedric's connection to the pack spirit. It was an agonizing, permanent castration of the soul. Cedric shrieked as his wolf was violently stripped away from him, leaving him nothing more than a weak, broken human. "Take him to the dungeons," Rosalind commanded the trembling guards, who had slowly regained their footing. "Throw him in the darkest cell. Let him live the rest of his pathetic mortal life in the very cage he built for my loyalists." As Cedric was dragged away, sobbing and broken, and Arabella whimpered in a corner, nursing her shattered leg and broken spirit, silence descended upon the great hall once more. But this time it was not the silence of a tomb. It was the silence of awe. The heavy oak doors swung open again, and Sir Cailan, bruised but alive, limped into the hall, flanked by Lord Gideon and the freed elders. Seeing Rosalind standing on the dais, bathed in the moonlight filtering through the high stained glass windows, Sir Cailan fell to one knee. "My Luna," he rasped, bowing his head. "No," King Alistair corrected, his voice echoing with absolute authority as he stepped up beside Rosalind. He reached out, wrapping his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side. The intoxicating scent of cedar and smoke washed over her, sealing their true mate bond for all to witness. "Not your Luna, your queen." One by one, the wolves of Oakhaven dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to the silver wolf who had returned from the dead, and the Alpha King who had given her the world to conquer. Did Rosalind's ruthless revenge satisfy your dark romance cravings? If you loved this tale of betrayal, undeniable mate bonds, and epic vengeance, hit that like button, share this story with your fellow werewolf romance addicts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more immersive, thrilling audio dramas. What should happen to Arabella next? Let us know in the comments.